Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRAradio.com.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome back, good souls of the planet Earth and beyond. This is Alan B. Smith. I'm your host. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight's guest is Ken Summers, paranormal investigator and author of the blog series Queer Paranormal Road Trips and the book Queer Hauntings, True Tales of Gay and Lesbian Ghosts. So, intriguingly enough, tonight, we'll be hearing specifically about LGBTQ spirits and ghosts, and we're always on the fringe, so we're always open to anything that is not quite mainstream. So really exciting news I do have to share with you, and that is that we are now moving to Tuesday nights live directly from KGRA Radio. Which will be nice because it'll free my hands up. I'll have Race Hobbs, thankfully, producing the show. And then on top of that, we're going to have the ability to do live call-ins and eventually open lines for listeners as well. All right, so that'll start April 30th is the first show. Tuesdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'll see you in the chat room. And if you want to call in, you can write this number down now. Not now. Don't call in now because it's not live. But when we do go live on Tuesdays, the number will be 855-472-5483. That's really easy. It's 85-KGRA live. Share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook, Twitter, or on Instagram. Facebook is Paranormal Now Radio, Instagram at Paranormal Now, Twitter at Paranormal_Now. And yeah, I do want to share and comment on, major loss for the paranormal community, and that's the loss of Lorraine Warren. And for those of you who are not familiar with her, you might be more familiar with her being the inspiration, her and her husband, Ed Warren, the inspiration behind movies like The Conjuring, as well as Annabelle. So I guess it's like that whole Conjuring universe. And she died at the age of 92. So, I'll ask Ken to see if he has any thoughts on this when we get to him in a moment. But yeah, if you have any thoughts or feedback on all those films and the influence that you think that she has had on the paranormal community, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So, Ken Summers is a paranormal researcher, history aficionado, part-time traveler, variegated artist, and purveyor of strange tales and forgotten hauntings. The ever-apologetic creator of the Orb color chart, he has always endeavored to balance open-minded fascination and humor with logical questioning in the pursuit of truth. Unlike many self-described experts in the field, he isn't afraid to admit that he doesn't have all the answers, and where others argue over the existence of ghosts, UFOs, Sasquatch, and other mysteries, Ken sees the true value of supernatural stories as a means of keeping interesting, forgotten history alive. Admittedly strange since childhood, Ken grew up in Ohio, fascinated by the supernatural, and researched his first ghost story at the age of 13. His first official investigation was conducted alone at midnight on Halloween in 1995. I love that you have a date for that. Throughout his teenage years, he researched and investigated dozens of locations with Cuyahoga Valley National Park. At Kent State University, he became treasurer of LGBTQ Kent, now Pride Kent, and founded his own paranormal group, the Moon Spenders. It's a cool name, in 1999. After living for a brief time in Shreveport, Louisiana, shortly before Hurricane Katrina, Ken returned to Northeast Ohio to self-publish Haunted Cuyahoga, Spirits of the Valley in 2006. He flew to Paris on TWA Flight 800 several weeks before it exploded on takeoff. Drank at the Admiral Duncan in Soho, London, mere months before it was nail-bombed, and was born on the anniversary of both Lincoln's death and the Titanic's sinking. Goodness gracious. Ken has been long fascinated by the most obscure, forgotten, and unusual stories, and includes related incidents related to the paranormal. The quest for the strangest of the strange, developed into a blog series of Queer Paranormal Road Trips in 2008. This questioning of the sexualities of specters led to his latest book, Queer Hauntings, True Tales of Gay and Lesbian Ghosts, published in 2009. Whenever possible, Ken puts his vast knowledge of useless information to use in the form of tours, lectures, and writing, all apparently useless? I don't know.
Yes.
Some of his work can be found on Week in Weird. He was also editor and a contributor for Jeri Holland's book, Haunted Akron. Currently, he's busily at work researching for a follow-up book, once again delving into the mysterious realm where weird and queer blur together. Welcome, Ken. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm pretty good. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks. Yeah. So the whole LGBT perspective on hauntings and the paranormal, was that always there from the get-go in 1995, or was that something that you built on?
It wasn't, and actually the reason why I remember that day specifically was there's a well-known haunting in Northeast Ohio that's been written about for years called Rogues Hollow, and it's this old mining community with dozens of legends. It's sort of Ohio's Sleepy Hollow, and I was still in high school, and I'd always been fascinated by ghost stories. I bought a Lloyd Auerbach's book, ESP Poltergeists, and I can't remember the full title of it. I bought that when I was 10, so that gives you an idea how long I've been fascinated by this. But I decided to go visit it for myself and went out, drove out there middle of the night, too afraid to get out of my car, just took pictures from my driver's side, and that sort of set everything off. And I've always been fascinated by stories, and it didn't really dawn on me until, I would say, my first introduction to local ghost stories in the Cuyahoga Valley would be a friend of mine in college from LGBTQ Kent told me one of my first stories I ever heard from there. And that sort of set that whole thing in motion. When I started joining paranormal groups, I met a few gay and lesbian members who were a bit quiet about it, but not too much. Mm-hmm. And it didn't really dawn on me because it's ingrained in our brains of, well, that's just normal. It's like the stories of lovers who are separated in death and are constantly trying to find each other. And you don't necessarily think, well, what about gays and lesbians and bisexuals and transgender? It's just taken for granted. And then I started wondering, I started blogging quite a while ago, probably when I was about 21, 22. Mm-hmm. And it just came up one day of, are there gay ghosts? And I just started looking it up.
In a conversation, or you just thought about it?
I just started thinking about it. And it was just one of those things. I couldn't think of anyone who had ever asked it. And when I started searching for it, all you would find is bad jokes about gay ghosts and things like that. But I started finding these really bizarre stories every once in a while, and I just started rolling with it and compiling whatever I could, and I turned it into a blog series. And after probably about a year or so, I noticed I had enough information. I thought this would make for an interesting book. Yeah. So I just started compiling all that, saving all of my research, all the locations, and it just kind of blossomed from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good description of it, blossom, because in a sense it was like this new thing. Not many people really focus on that subject, and yeah, it had never occurred to me. I mean, ghosts. I think there's also the fact that ghosts are just otherworldly. So they are sort of separate in a sense, that the way we see them, and you're so focused on the paranormal aspect of that you tend to forget the human side of all that. You hear about the stories of what happened to them, how they died, that sort of thing. But I mean, you really don't get much into like behaviors and psychology for these beings. And I guess I wonder, is there something distinct about queer ghosts or spirits that behavior-wise that are different than any other ghosts?
Not necessarily. Some things we may think of as different just because we're not used to a queer perspective of it. But some of the cases are, it's not where there's anything overtly different. It's that they're ghosts of people who are known to have been LGBTQ in life. So it's just sort of carried over with that. And then there are the strange cases, the humorous or funny ones that I ran across. Like there's a hotel in England in my book where there was a female ghost in this particular place and the restaurant aspect of it. And this female ghost kept pinching the bottoms of the female staff and only the women. So that is unusual, but I think even Washington Irving's ghosts in Sunnyside near Sleepy Hollow, where he lived, he's been known to pinch people on the rear end too. So it's not something that's different. It's just people don't expect it from the same sex.
Right. I mean, I guess there could be other motivations for that, right? That we're maybe not aware of, like sort of like a prankster sort of way.
Yeah, the way I have always told people about the paranormal is, it's not necessarily scary. It's behaviors of ghosts seem to be the same as their behaviors in life. So if you had someone who was always playing pranks, if their ghost is in fact them, which is always a big debated subject, they're going to be pranksters in the afterlife too. And if someone was very, very evil in ways, if a murderer, they're going to be a very dark entity in death as well. So it's just carrying over whatever their behaviors were in their actual life.
Right. Yeah, and as far as Elaine Warren, do you have any thoughts on that matter at all, or
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Has it affected you in any way, or were you particularly interested in her work?
I didn't really follow the Warrens in depth. I've always known about them since I was a child, seeing them on TV, even before I was truly interested in the paranormal. So they were major figures in the paranormal realm. They've had some controversies, like a lot of public figures have. But I don't like the idea of speaking ill of the dead in any respect like that. I think it's sad that we've now lost both of the Warrens. They have left a very important legacy when it comes to the paranormal and paranormal research. Regardless of what your thoughts are on them as people, it's sad whenever you lose someone important like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know there were some supposed controversies over their behaviors, particularly Ed.
Yes.
But I just don't know how much that was grounded in truth, especially when I know there was a lawsuit and it was wrapped up in Hollywood, and people's motivation are money or retribution, or revenge rather. So it's muddy water. But in the sense that the paranormal community definitely lost, a major influence on all these thousands of people that do this, now from their homes or on TV or wherever. It is a sad day for certain in that regard. And I never had the chance to interview Elaine or the Warrens, so I cannot speak from a personal perspective at all. But you would think that investigators like that, who've done it for so long, why would they not pick up on this idea of a gay or lesbian haunting?
I think it's not something that people tend to think about. And I think I've always felt throughout my life, even in childhood, a bit of an outsider. So I always had the perspective of being from a space on the outside, the fringes of society and the world, sort of looking at it through a microscope. So I've always thought of the most random, bizarre thoughts. I've even thought about why so many ghost stories involve white people and there's not many people of color being represented in hauntings as well. And whether that's something that we're just ignoring or if it's something that it's a cultural related thing, because you go into different cultures and their belief systems when it comes to ghosts and the afterlife are completely different.
Yeah.
But there have actually, well, sorry about that. I didn't mean to interject. There have actually been, the one thing I like about this new book project I've been working on, all the research, is you find that over the years, over the past 150 or so years of people investigating the paranormal, psi phenomena, all of that, there's a lot of queer, gay content out there that has been studied. There was a man named Michael McBeath who wrote an article, I believe it was 1983, door on the front that led right out to the sidewalk in the street. And she's actually the reason why they moved the front door to the side, because she had way too much to drink. She walked out the front door one night right into traffic and was hit and killed by a car. But she still hung around. I know a few bartenders who worked there who had unnerving experiences. One actually got in trouble because he was so terrified one night he left all the cash on the counter and just ran out and locked the door behind him because he just could not handle seeing crumpled up napkins flying down the staircase at him when he was alone at night.
See, that's the kind of thing you can't deny.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes.
That's just, and when you are filled with dread like that, that's just not your imagination, right?
No. Those kinds of experiences. I try and be skeptical about everything, but things like that it's really hard to find some way of dismissing things like that. I had my own experience with Karen. I was really upset one night sitting out in my car after a shift, and I actually felt her hand grab onto mine. It was an ice cold hand that grabbed, I could feel it in between each finger. And she literally held my hands the entire ride home, all the way until I was within a mile of home.
Yeah. See, okay, so I'm fascinated with the paranormal. I do not want those kind of experiences, though. Like and I hold those in high regard who, sort of seek, if you will, to get close to the other world. Do you feel like you have an extra sense or ability to do that? Because not everyone who investigates ghosts necessarily is touched in a way. Do you know? Yeah,
when I started off, I always wondered if I had some sort of sixth sense with the paranormal. I don't know. I'm very much a skeptic deep down in a lot of ways. So. And I'm also my own worst enemy when it comes to everything. So I dismiss myself more than anything else. But I have had a lot of strange experiences happen that just really no logical way for me to explain what's happened. When it comes to experiencing the paranormal, though, over about 20 years, I've only seen one apparition, one full-fledged apparition. Not just a shadow or anything like that. So it's even me, it's such a random thing that happens. There's no real way to predict exactly how many times you're going to encounter things. And I know other people who have experiences all the time, but I'm always out there trying to see something for myself to experience it. And yes, I've been terrified. When I saw that apparition, I was absolutely terrified because it was this glowing shape of a man that walked down off of a hill about 30 feet away from me. And I wanted to run. And after about 5 minutes and calming myself down, I wanted to go back and find out what that was, but it was already gone.
See, that's interesting. As soon as you said that, it reminded me of the Travis Walton case, where the crew panicked when they saw Travis lifted off the ground, and then this craft there, and their first instinct was run so that we don't get caught too. which, you know, people have mixed feelings and criticisms about that reaction, but it's kind of like, well, what are you going to do, right? There's this thing that you have no idea. It's so, you know, unhuman. And so how do you, there's no way for the human brain to digest that. We're designed, how do we deal with tigers? How do we deal with bears? How do we deal with other humans? Right. But then when something else comes out of the ordinary like that, how does the brain process it? It kind of like goes a little haywire, I think. I think that's a perfectly normal reaction.
Oh, yeah, and that's instinctual, too. That's the fight or flight mechanism. So
exactly,
you basically, that's what's happening, and then you add on the layer of our fear of the unknown and unexplained, and it's perfectly logical to just want to bolt whenever you see something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's funny. And the reverse is sometimes true. It's the deer in the headlights kind of syndrome, and I actually explain away a lot of ghosts or cryptids or UFOs that are not caught on camera, because when you first see it and your eyes lock on it, there's like this ultimate curiosity, but also kind of like that state of fear, and so you're sort of frozen watching this thing, and so the first thought in your mind is not to reach for your camera, to capture it.
And I that's one thing that has always bothered me, is because whenever you have experiences like that, people ask, the first thing they usually ask is, did you get a picture of it? It's like, no. By the time I actually wrapped my brain around what was happening, It was a little bit too late to snap a picture.
Yep, exactly. But have you ever caught anything at all?
I have. I've captured a handful of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, over the years. Mm-hmm. I took a lot of orb photographs back when orbs were all the rage, as why I say I'm apologetic about the orb color chart, because that started on ghostvillage.com. I was in the forums with some people probably around the early 2000s, and we started talking about this idea of, do orb colors mean anything, and whether auras could possibly explain that. So I wrote an article for Ghost Magazine in about 2004 about orb color theory, as I called it, where colors could possibly explain different things like that. And I've seen some strange colored orbs myself. So,
well, you know what,
it's a lot of.
Ken, we're coming up on the first break. So one, we'll get to more of some of these LGBT hauntings, the cases themselves. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about the orb color theory. That's pretty fascinating. I don't think I've heard anyone else come up with that theory before. So anyway, we'll be back. This is Alan B. Smith with Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio with Ken Summers. So we're just getting into it, so don't go away. We'll be right back. All right, we are back with Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. My guest is Ken Summers, and we were talking all things queer. So Ken, I do want to hear a little bit more about your orb color theory. And before I forget, coming out of the break, that is Septembrio, using the Stranger Things theme, and they got permission to do so. Septembrio.com cover version of Stranger Things. It's a fantastic group. If you want to check them out, septembrio.com. All right, so yeah, Ken, back to the color orb thing. I really want to hear what you have to say about multicolored meanings, basically, I suppose, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of become a bit of a joke for me because orbs have fallen out of fashion.
See, I thought you were going to take that seriously, but you're like, no, it's a joke.
No, well, back when I started it was because digital cameras were new, and people put a lot of stock in these orbs, and you still get paranormal shows and people out there who take pictures. And every single time I do a lecture or a tour or something like that, someone comes up to me inevitably and says, I've got this great ghost picture. And they show me a picture of an orb. And I don't even know where to begin with that half the time, because I don't want to just tell them they have nothing. But back then.
Why? Because it's a
was,
lens glare or a piece
I
of
would
dust
say
or something.
99% of the time, it's dust.
It's dust. Okay.
There's sometimes lens flares. There
Mm-hmm.
is humidity in the air will cause it sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
Insects within a certain range will cause it. There's so many different things that cause these orbs, and it has a lot to do with digital cameras and the way that they work, that they're more predominant in digital cameras than they were in 35 millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
But back when they were new, everyone was excited about them. I would get excited about them too. The only orb I've ever really taken as, okay, this is something, is the one that I saw with my own eyes. It was about the size of a softball. It was a pale blue color, sort of like a gas flame on a range.
Mm-hmm.
And it shot straight down about 5 feet off of the trail that I was walking on and took off at a 90-degree angle out into a field. And still to this day, I have no idea what that was. But that helps me with the idea of maybe orbs could be a thing. I've discounted 90% of the pictures I've gotten of orbs over the years. And I feel bad now because but we all have a learning curve when it comes to the paranormal. We all think things
especially
are amazing
when you're younger
at first.
too.
Sorry?
Especially when you're younger.
Oh, yeah. And we're always learning things in this field, and as new equipment comes along, we think things are amazing, and then it turns out that things are not always what we expect them to be. And I think the problem with orbs still being entrenched in some people's minds is when people capture an image that they believe is a ghost, and they show it to me or show it to anyone in the field, they're not looking for you to analyze it. They're looking for you to confirm their belief that this is a ghost.
Right.
And if you tell them that what you truly believe that it's not, then they just dismiss what you say and they try and find someone else who will confirm whatever they believe.
See, I've thought that perhaps orbs, those that people see with their own eyes, not necessarily just caught on camera and they noticed it later, but for those who did see it with their own eyes, could it not be explained by, for instance, plasma lightning, right? Like that's a weird phenomenon. Like it took scientists a long time to confirm that was a thing. So could it not be some other sort of like electromagnetic or plasmic something, ionization, little burst in the air? I don't know.
It definitely could be. And the funny thing about ball lightning is for so many years, skeptics would say that it is impossible. It could not exist. There's just no way. People are making it up. Yeah. And then suddenly we decide, okay, now we have concrete proof that it does exist, so therefore it's a real phenomena. But there are a lot of things that cause things, and sometimes it's the most mundane things and just the right spooky environment that make us think that certain things are paranormal. There's always things like different lightning bugs and glowworms that, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, will unhinge you a little bit, or a deer out in the woods that catches your flashlight and their eye glows and you see this flash of light. There's always little things like that. But there are still also weird lights that we see that can't always be explained. I've always been fascinated by will-o-wisps and different phantom lights, or spook lights as they call them. A lot of famous ones out there, like the Mako light that was it wasn't directly seen by President Garfield, but it was explained to him when he was stopped at the one railroad stop where it was seen all the time. And spook lights like that tend to be dismissed as swamp gas, and that's the one explanation I've never really grasped as being a logical explanation for these glowing balls appearing, especially around swamps, because how does it combust in the first place? How is this perfect ball of gas catching fire? And if it is catching fire, how is it lasting for a minute or two when that gas would logically just be consumed within seconds,
Right.
and it would just be a quick burst. But people have seen these lights just hovering above the ground for minutes or hours in some cases. And it's just, I try and find the logical explanation, but sometimes the logical one doesn't seem as logical when you actually start analyzing it.
Well, I think that's what good science is, right? When we're looking at something and we're trying to, approach it with all the most obvious or easiest solutions.
Yeah. And I think,
yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's why I've always considered myself a fence sitter when it comes to the paranormal. I'm not a total believer. I'm not a total skeptic, because both sides make good points. But I think when you get to the opposite poles of both sides, so often they are so entrenched in their convictions that they refuse to budge and look at, well, okay, maybe this explanation isn't the best one. And it's like people saying ghosts are spirits of the dead. Yeah. Then I've always brought this up to people who are convinced that a ghost has to be the ghost of someone who was once alive. It's like, well, then why are there ghost trains, ghost houses, ghost ships? Because they were never living things. So there has to be some kind of broader explanation for these different types of phenomena.
Maybe, I don't know. I suppose maybe could the ghosts sort of conjure those materialistic things, like a train or a car or whatever?
In theory, I think it could be possible, but I don't know. And like Lincoln's funeral train has been a ghostly phenomena that's been witnessed for over 100 years now, and it's a strange story for people who said that they've experienced it, because it's not only the train, but it's a literal skeleton crew on board the train operating it and everything else like that. So it's a range of ghosts on a ghost train. So there's a lot of, it's really difficult. It's why when people ask me what a ghost is, I don't have a simple explanation. I don't even like using the word ghost necessarily. I prefer to call it ghostly phenomena, because there's so many different things that can explain different things, but not all explanations can explain everything.
Can you say that again? No, I'm kidding. Yes, I feel that way. I feel that way too. And I think a lot of researchers in a number of fields would agree in that regard. Even a lot of ufologists now, who typically in the past were like, oh, it has to be a nuts and bolts thing. It's safer scientifically to just stick with paperwork, paper trail, whatever's tangible. But I think there's a lot more flexibility as more and more stories and sightings come out, that you have to start to question whether there's this correlation between all these, or overlap, maybe is a better term, for all of these paranormal things that are occurring, because things don't exactly fit. Just like you said, but the train, it doesn't quite fit. The train itself doesn't need to come back and say you did me wrong. Like, so what's going on here? And then for me, I don't know about you, but I mean, do you ever think that there's something with multiple dimensions going on with what we know with quantum physics that could be? I don't know. They have the holographic theory. They have string theory. I don't know.
I've thought a lot about that, actually. That and how time functions. And I'm not a physicist or well-versed in the technical side of the universe and all that. And I know that whenever people bring up quarks and things like that and string theory, it's sort of uncomfortable for a lot of scientific people. So I don't delve into that. But I've always wondered if, like I tried to explain, I have quite a few skeptic friends, and we always discuss the paranormal in vague terms and different ideas, because I befriend anyone no matter what side that they're on of the issue. And I've always told him, I always wondered, I think it was probably the movie The Others that set this in motion in my mind of what if instead of ghosts being a tangible thing or a spirit come back to life, what if time, instead of being a straight line, is like a ball of yarn that's wrapped around itself hundreds of times, and in certain places two strings touch and bleed through. So ghostly phenomena is seeing into the past or into the future. And so it's a glimpse, sort of maybe like a holographic type of thing, but it's or like a two-way mirror where you see something that's not completely there and it's just a fleeting glimpse of it. And then maybe to explain why people in the past experienced the ghost, it's the ghost hunters that are out there that the people in the past are seeing, interpreting as ghosts, and the ghost hunters are seeing people from the past trying to find this ghost, and something strange along that line.
The repeatability of it. You know, because that seems like it's something almost fixed.
Yeah,
which is
I
odd,
haven't
which is odd.
Completely thought it through. It's not like a theory that's been written in stone, but it's always one of those things in the back of my mind.
Yeah, but that's what makes it so fun. And you were, you know, talking about that earlier. You know, for me, like, I was talking to a family member recently, and they're talking about evidence and disclosure, and I was like, yeah, I really want disclosure, but then if we get disclosure, then the joy of like living in the mystery of it is kind of gone. So yes, of course I want disclosure, or I want to know the truth, but there's something for me invigorating and magical about not quite getting it, you know?
Yeah. And I love a good mystery. I've always I've loved Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, all of that. So part of me really loves the mystery behind it. And I, as much as I would like answers, I'd hate to be disappointed by what those answers are.
Yeah. No, of course you don't want that. You saw Hellier, I'm sure, right?
Yes, because I wrote for Greg and Dana on Week in Weird for quite a few years there. So I've known them and I've followed them for quite a while. I followed Greg back when he was with his Ghost Hunters Inc., which was this just a bunch of teenagers running around visiting haunted places in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania and New York.
And he has those old pictures too.
Yes.
They're just classic. Like, there are a bunch of people like that, you know, like when we were teenagers, just except for them, there was that one picture where they're holding like just all these guns, and you're like, dude, you're going after ghosts. What are you doing? Like, but that's funny. Yeah, but Hellier, I love Hellier.
Oh yeah.
You know, I did kind of feel like it was one episode too long. You know, they could have condensed it, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of like David Lynch style, and that's what I really appreciated about, because it's not necessarily about, ooh, we found something. You know, like Twin Peaks, when they rebooted it on not rebooted it, but continued on Showtime. Yeah, that whole thing was not about answers at all. Yeah. You know, it's about the space in between. And I think that what Carl Pfeiffer did with that was really smart. And it made it really interesting and kind of drew you in. And Carl was actually on the show, I want to say like 2 months ago, talking about that. Do you think that, you know, documenting things like that is misleading to the public, you know, because it's like you kind of get drawn in and then you're like, oh, they didn't really find anything.
I don't think so. I love documentaries, and I'm always a firm believer that the journey is more important than the destination. And it's the way that any kind of research goes, is you never know where things are going to go, and you never know what's going to be uncovered in the process. And sometimes, I don't know, for me, it's more interesting to find out the true story behind something than to confirm what someone already believes. Right. And it's like, there's another really good documentary that I've always loved called Cropsy. And it's about this ghost story out in the middle of nowhere. either New York or New Jersey, I forget which. But he uncovers this story of some unpleasant characters involving children and mental patients. That's the truth sort of buried underneath all of the legends. It's not as exciting as what the legend is, but it's that whole journey into finding the truth that I've always been really fascinated with. It's actually what I do a lot with my own research, and I'll set off to start working on a story, and it'll lead to 25 different directions and more questions than answers. And that's part of what drives me on in a lot of the cases.
Yeah. So of all the cases that you wrote about in your book, what case did you think stands out the most as sort of undeniable that this ghost is gay or trans or whatever?
Undeniable is always difficult because I research a lot of stories involving people from distant past, 100 years or more ago. Like Walt Whitman, he haunts James Hill out in New York. But I would say there are probably undeniable aspects. I would say there would be two that stand out to me. One is Harvey Milk out in San Francisco. There was, when they were filming the movie Milk, they filmed it in his old Castro camera store, the actual storefront where he was. And Gus Van Sant later told some people in some interviews, while they were doing one of their scenes, it was supposed to be a closed set, and some people noticed that there was someone walking behind them and observing the camera crew filming the whole thing, and some of the people happened to look over to see who it was, and it was Harvey Milk himself standing behind the crew watching them filming a movie about his life. And he's definitely been all over the news for so long. There's not really any mistaking that was definitely him. There's also the one case that probably makes me the most uncomfortable, and it always has since I actually wrote that chapter, is Corpsewood Manor out in the middle of nowhere in Georgia. It was a college professor from Illinois and his partner who moved out into a rural area to sort of escape the city life. And they were murdered in their house that they built. And the killers were arrested and convicted. But ever since then, I actually have some friends of mine who, while they were living in Tennessee, went out to that site. And they said it's one of the most uncomfortable places you can be, not just because it's out in the middle of nowhere and not the safest area to go out investigating in the middle of the night alone or anything like that, but you will hear their dogs howling. People experience their ghosts there. Lots of uncomfortable things happen to people who go out there, and anyone who tries to take any remnants of the place is often cursed with bad luck. People who've taken bricks have had near fatal injuries until they suddenly took them back, and then everything went back to normal. But it's one of those strange cases, and it's a really tragic story at the same time too. Yeah.
You've not tried to take anything back from there, have you?
No, I still haven't made it out there yet. Okay. I would probably be tempted to take something because I like souvenirs like that, but I don't know if I necessarily believe in such bad luck. I think I would probably say something to them if I was there before I took anything like that and let them know I just wanted a little souvenir from them and explain to them who I was and all of that, and hope that made things better. But I think I've had enough close calls in my life that I'm not too worried about superstitious thoughts like that.
You feel like you've come out alive enough that
yes,
your skin is repelling evil forces, perhaps, in a matter of speaking. Okay, so I lost my train of thought there. No, yeah. So we're coming up on the second break. Before we go, in your hometown where you live, are people aware that you're like the ghost guy, or do you kind of keep that private?
Well, when I started investigating when I was a teenager, it was not a popular thing. It was the thing that you kind of whispered under your breath, and it would get you teased a lot about that. There's quite a lot of ghost hunters in Ohio, so it's a very popular thing. Mm-hmm. I've been on local news. I've given talks at local libraries on different things. So I've been interviewed by a few cases, so people know for general part that I'm into the paranormal. But there are a lot of people around here too that have never heard of me. Mm-hmm. I've never heard of them. But then there's people who I didn't even realize I was close and living close to until a few years ago when I found out by accident, like Michelle Belanger. She was on Paranormal State and all that. She lives less than 30 miles away from me. I had no idea until probably about 4 or 5 years ago that she was living so close to me.
Yeah. I mean, do you get to gather with others, other investigators in the area for meetings or?
Not really. I belong to quite a few different groups over the years, mm-hmm. and I still have some friends from different paranormal groups that occasionally I'll go out with on little local hunts, impromptu, just, hey, I'm not doing anything tonight, let's go somewhere. But no, I can be a bit of a black sheep when it comes to the paranormal too, because my skeptical, logical side kicks in, and when I say things that don't necessarily jive with what other people think, sometimes they don't want to have me back around again necessarily.
Because you're the kind of like, I don't know, undermining their need to believe or something like that, or
sometimes, yeah. I think a lot of times I'll run into people who don't like their ideas challenged, and I like to try to look at things from all different perspectives, all different sides. Mm-hmm. I remember I was involved in the paranormal group a few years back, and they were going to be doing a lecture on how to hunt ghosts, and they were talking about orbs of all things, mm-hmm. and they were going to say this is a real orb because it's this color, and this isn't the real orb because it looks like this. And I just said to them, well, if you're going to say that, you're going to have to also be able to answer the question, if this is giving off its own light, mm-hmm. like you say that a true orb is, why can't people see it with the naked eye? And they all turned to me, looked at me, and then sort of closed circle among themselves and cut me out completely.
Wow, that's are you a Star Wars fan, perchance?
Unfortunately not.
You're not.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I was gonna make a parallel comparison, but it's probably not worth it. But we are coming up to the break. We'll be back. This is the last break, and then we've got an hour straight to go. But I do want to ask you, have you, when we get back, have you had any backlash from people in the LGBTQ community for doing what you're doing, and or just paranormal investigators? This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA. My guest is Ken Summers, and we will be right back. All right, and we are back from the break. This is Alan B. Smith from Paranormal Now. If you want to find out more about the show, you can follow me on Twitter at paranormal_now or on Instagram at Paranormal Now, and of course on Facebook, Paranormal Now Radio. My guest is Ken Summers. This has been a great conversation so far. We haven't gotten to a lot of cases yet, but we're getting there. But yeah, I do want to ask you, Ken, about this case with the two brothers, Schneider.
Willie and Rudy Schneider.
Schneider. Yeah. So what's the case there?
They were famous trance mediums back during the spiritualist movement. They are among a lot of mediums I've come across over the years that were, well, their sexuality has come into question in a lot of different ways. Willie and Rudy both had their spirit contacts that they relied on regularly were female, specifically female all the time. Willie actually dressed in women's clothing sometimes during his seances. Okay. He also would allegedly, according to some reports, become sexually aroused sometimes during his sittings. He would make passes towards some of the men in the rooms as well.
And this was reported?
Yes, it's all cataloged through different psychical research societies, the Society of Psychical Research, and a lot of the early writers back then. Mm-hmm. So he and his brother both, there's been a lot of questions raised about their sexualities. So it's interesting. They're one of the first pair of psychic mediums that I came across that had questionable sexualities, mm-hmm. but they're far from the only ones. There's Daniel Douglas Hume, who is a Scottish medium as well. He was famous for his levitations. And he did marry a wealthy heiress, married a couple of them, but he also lived specifically with men, and allegedly some of the people who came forward to back up his claims of the paranormal were people he was sleeping with, and they were all men. So there have been a lot of cases of spiritualists who were very, very feminine in nature mm-hmm. with men, and quite a few cases too of women who were rather masculine in nature as well. There was, I cannot remember her name, but there was another female medium I ran across recently who actually, since her spirit guide was a man, she would actually put a fake beard on during her seances. And she would flirt with the ladies in the room as well.
Right. So do you think well, with her and the Schneiders, do you think they were using their mediumship as a sort of way to be able to express themselves that they otherwise couldn't?
I believe so. There's a lot of people have written about the spiritualist movement. It was mm-hmm. because it was very much the forefront of women's rights and abolition, and a lot of these that were at the time very radical, deviant ideas of society, where it wasn't a normal thing. It was working toward all of that. And at the same time, you had all the research in sexuality starting to come out. You had Magnus Hirschfeld and his sexual inversion ideas, which evolved into homosexuality, mm-hmm. and all these people studying sexuality and discovering that it's not as simple as everyone is.
It's not
heterosexual.
Black and white, right?
Yeah. So it was a very blossoming time for things like that, and there's a lot of comfort that can be found in it. That Michael McBeath, who wrote about science sexuality, he actually mentioned in his journal article about a large portion of the mediums of the day being gay or lesbian. Mm-hmm. It's been refuted by a few other people in different articles because there's no tangible evidence of it, because it's such a hidden thing back then. Sure. That even then people kept very quiet about it. So it was still very a closeted area, even though it was very open at the same time. Mm-hmm. Like Madame Blavatsky, who believes she started the Theosophical Society, she was known as the divine hermaphrodite. So there's a lot of strange sexualities all in that whole time period, a time when people wouldn't think that the idea of people being gay, lesbian, bisexual was sort of coming to a forefront.
Yeah. Well, also just the very fact that you show any sort of interest in the paranormal, to me, it sort of just opens the door for not thinking conventionally, not thinking so conservatively.
Yes.
I think that you sort of have to have an open mind. And then when you start opening your mind, you start seeing things that you otherwise wouldn't see through the filter of, the tropes and, vernacular of regular society. Have you had any of the LGBT community come back specifically, and say to you, like, Ken, this is not good what you're doing, because you're equating like being gay with weird stuff, and
Surprisingly, I haven't really had that much backlash when it comes to that. There are a lot of people who are disappointed because I don't filter things out. I don't just talk about the positive aspects of different things. It's like a lot of the hauntings that are in my book. Some of them are very, very lighthearted and treat things very nicely. And there are stories like Harvey Milk, where even though it involves murder, it's a very positive overall idea. But there's a lot of cases of people who were murdered and major tragedies, like the upstairs lounge fire in New Orleans, where someone threw a firebomb into the stairwell of a second-floor gay bar, and about 33 people lost their lives. They were all incinerated in the fire. And it's not stuff that people want to be reminded of. People want to think about the positive, happy, cheerful stuff. And when you start bringing up rather depressing stories, people don't always enjoy that negative side of things being out there.
Well, yeah, there have been a number of places that have had tragic incidents involving gay, lesbians, and trans people. So I wonder, are there a multitude of bars and restaurants and underground clubs, at the time, if you think like 60s and 70s, where, there might be a haunting. And that also makes me think, is it possible to have a haunting, not by necessarily someone who was murdered, right, or killed directly, but someone that would haunt because there's an anger or a bitter resentment or something that's associated with that place that they experienced?
I would say so. I've heard some stories of ghosts of one of London's Molly houses, as they used to call gay bars back in the 1800s. There was a raid on one of those bars, I believe in the late 1700s, and a bunch of men were arrested, and there are some reports among some people of still seeing men running for their lives in the area where that happened. But it's not always about tragic death and things like that. There's another bar in New Orleans called Cafe Lafitte in Exile. It was originally in Lafitte's blacksmith shop, but the landlord evicted them, and they created Cafe Lafitte in Exile. But it was frequented by Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote, and both of them haunt the bar still to this day. Truman Capote has been seen sitting in his favorite bar stool up against a post with a whiskey, just looking very distraught. Truman Capote has been experienced in the stairwell, stopping people who are coming and going to ask them questions and wanting to strike up conversation. And there's another ghost of a former well-known patron nicknamed Mr. Bubbles, who apparently haunts the upstairs veranda areas as well.
And do we know why he's called Mr. Bubbles?
No,
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to. The one time I was in New Orleans was in the middle of Southern Decadence, which is a huge festival comparable to Mardi Gras. And the bar was so packed full that I figured there was no chance of me getting inside to talk to anyone about anything.
Yeah. Is there anything in your area in Ohio similar to this sort of incident? Because I'm in New York, so I hear about these things, and of course you hear about tragic things, like Orlando recently. But is there anything in the Ohio area?
I've been desperately trying to find stuff from Ohio. I know the Queer Ghost Hunters, who've had a YouTube series not too long ago. They're based in Columbus, Ohio. I actually met Lori Gum and Shane McClellan's when they came to where I work. I work for a scenic railroad, and they wanted me to talk about the local hauntings and my book, Queer Hauntings, as well. So I met them and all of their ghost hunting friends on that whole excursion. But they've done a lot of research in a lot of places. They've gone to Mansfield Reformatory, which has become an extremely popular place for ghost hunting, and it's been that way for as long as I can remember. It was where Shawshank Redemption was filmed as well. And it has a lot of haunted history to it, including one of the wings used to be referred to as the women's wing, because it was where a lot of people convicted of sodomy, and it was where all the gay men were kept in that particular section. So there is some understanding that there's a possibility of some gay ghosts there. Otherwise, I've looked into a lot of different tragedies that have happened. We haven't had any large-scale tragedies. I know of some murders that have happened outside of different gay venues in the area, but I've never found any spiritual attachments related to those, unfortunately. It's really difficult to research, and it's really difficult. Even regular ghost stories, it's difficult to find people who are necessarily willing to tell their stories. But when you add on the layer of LGBTQ, people are even more reluctant to come forward and say, oh yeah, by the way, this person is haunting this place and I've experienced something there.
Well, I suspect that'll change, right? Eventually over
I
time?
like to think so. I find from my own experience that while there are a lot of LGBTQ people interested in the paranormal, there's also a lot of LGBTQ skeptics. So it's an interesting mix, and I would say the skeptics are a bit more adamant, and I get a lot of flack for people who are disbelievers more than people who think that this is a bad idea. Because what I always tell people, and I firmly believe, and most people who've read my different work learn, is, to me, the most important thing is history. It's telling the stories that have been forgotten. So whenever I deal with different hauntings, I delve into the history of the people involved and the buildings involved. And to me, that's the most important thing to get out of it. It's not a scary story to tell friends. It's to learn about this person who died and what contributions they made during their life to the world around them.
When you say history, I mean, you don't necessarily mean like history, 50 plus years. It could be a few years ago or.
Yeah, there's a bed and breakfast called the Rose and Crown in Provincetown, and it's owned by this lesbian couple. I interviewed them back in 2009 when I was working on the book. Wonderful couple, and it's haunted by the former owner that passed away, I would say, within the past 20, 25 years. He was big on AIDS activism and all of that. And that was the confusing part for them and people who were experiencing the haunting, because people kept seeing a female spirit in the house, in the second floor, especially in the front area of the building. And when every year for Carnival, he would dress up in drag. And so they've come to the conclusion that it is him dressed in drag that people are seeing on the second floor inside the building.
Right. And I want to go back to the spiritualism now that you bring up drag too. Was that, so sociologically speaking, was that an early period where we started to see a change towards acceptance?
Yeah, I would, in some ways, yes. And people forget because history changes, and we have this strange ability to forget things that happened after a certain point. Back in the, say, 1900 to about 1930, drag was extremely popular. Drag performers and cross-dressers were very, very popular entertainers of the day. There were a lot of famous ones out there, and it was extremely well accepted by everyone. And then around the time of World War II, everything changed. Everything changed in Berlin with the Nazis, and everything being thrown into chaos, and society sort of closed down. There were like the Hays Code in Hollywood, making being gay unacceptable to the masses, and it all closed off. And it wasn't until around the 60s and into the 70s where things started opening back up again. Yeah, interesting. It's funny how, war or trauma on large scales can really shift a society. Oh, yeah. And I think that, that there's a certain shift at that time, and a lot of good came out of that time. Yes. But I understand that. I mean, that's how we got the 1950s, right? Like the Beaver family, because everybody just wanted like safety and structure and familiarity, and they needed that comfort. Yes. And so finally, it just took a good 15 years to really start to break out of that. I guess kind of starting with the beatniks, but do you think that when you go into a space, being gay, do you think that would make any difference at all in attracting or being able to communicate with a ghost that once was or is, or however that works? I like to think that it would, because I think everyone who is LGBTQ has experienced that feeling of fear of rejection and not wanting to talk about it, and not wanting to express themselves and try and blend in and quote unquote play it straight and switch pronouns, talk about, if you're a man, talk about your girlfriend when you're really meaning your boyfriend. And I think if there's some kind of comfort level, knowing that someone else at least has something in common with you, I know for the living, it's a lot more comfortable to have someone who you feel you can open up with, that you know is not going to judge you for something. And I would imagine that the same would apply for the dead as well. And what about communicating directly with the dead? Can you do that? Have you tried to? I've never really had any success with that. Okay. I've tried. I've experimented around with Ouija boards and like dowsing rods and pendulums and you name it. I have had some experience with dowsing rods. I'm always a little bit skeptical about those because of the ideomotor response and all of that. But I've never had any direct conversations with a spirit where I knew for sure that this was absolutely what was happening. And that's where you get into psychics and psychic abilities. And I've known a lot of psychics over the years. I'm friends with some. I really admire a lot of them, but I don't always 100% believe in their abilities, but I don't hold that against them, and I hope that they don't hold that against me either. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. We do everything paranormal on this show. Yeah. But there's two areas that I'm more skeptical of. And I've had psychics come on the show, some wonderful people. But there is that side of me that's like, how do I know that how much of what you're saying is true and how much is sort of imagined in your mind? And then the same thing with someone who's like, oh, I've had contact with aliens and this is their message, blah, 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 blah. I do believe that abductions have occurred, but you can't just take everybody on their word. Right. I mean, you kind of have to, you need some validation. Yeah. And the scientific mindset that I have is always learned years ago about Zener cards from J.B. Rhine and testing people's abilities with those cards, and using hit or miss when you're having a conversation so you don't give away anything to the psychic being interviewed. So I'm always mindful of things like that. Some psychics are perfectly fine with that. They welcome it. And others are absolutely terrified the second you get into the idea of testing them on their abilities.
Yeah. It's funny you say Zener cards because I was thinking about the Ghostbusters. What did you think about the 2016 film?
I actually liked it. I know it wasn't as popular as a lot of people would like. It wasn't like the most stellar, amazing movie I've ever seen in my life. I'll admit that. It had its flaws. It had its jokes that fell flat. But overall, I liked it. And I especially liked the idea of people who had actually written about and researched the paranormal. Instead of so many ghost hunters nowadays that you run across in real life, that I've run across over the past 10 years or so, when you ask them where they started out, it's always, oh, yeah, I saw a couple seasons of Ghost Hunters, and now I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you don't know people like J.B. Rhine, you don't know Hans Holzer, you don't know about the early days of psychical research and science and the old Ghost Club from the 1860s, I want to say. All those people who came before us who've worked so hard on investigating, like Harry Price, who was the celebrity of his day when it came to investigating hauntings. And they don't know all that collective history, and they just go with what one person on TV said. And it's disappointing.
I liked Ghostbusters 2016. And I think this kind of ties into what you were just saying.
Yeah.
In the original Ghostbusters, it was in the 80s. So what, 85, the first one? The 84?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Up until the early 80s, there was still some legitimate research going on in the paranormal. That it wasn't exactly disregarded like it is now, right? I mean, there were actually like scientists and universities that were doing studies, and so that seriousness, that side of it, was a main fiber in the original Ghostbusters. Because I mean, Dan Aykroyd was obsessed. I mean,
oh yes,
this was his baby. It came from his heart, and it came from a very real fascination with the paranormal, and you could feel it in the first two films. Whereas the third film, the reboot, I enjoyed the acting. Some of the comedy was pretty good, but there was some missing element of that was in the original too. It just wasn't there, and I think it's the kind of thing it's hard to create without the original creator. If that makes sense. I don't know.
It does. And I do agree with you on that respect. But I think it's a very different world in a lot of ways than it was in the early 80s. Like you said, it was a lot more accepted. It wasn't extremely easy to find, but it was a lot more likely that you'd be able to find a university where you could get a degree in parapsychology. Now you really can't. There are maybe 5 or so universities throughout the entire world that'll offer that to you. But I wouldn't say that the research has ended. It's sort of gone underground. The Rhine Research Center is still up and going. They're still working on things, but in a lot of cases, it has a lot to do with the fact that admitting that you're researching a paranormal, unexplained subject is almost a death sentence for your career. So I think a lot of cases where people are interested in investigating and researching it, they have to do it on a very low key, very quietly, so that it's not well published, so that they don't become a laughingstock.
Right. So let's talk about the amazing Randy, if we can. He's a fascinating character.
Yes.
And he, my fields of study tend to be more towards ufology, and he was a big debunker in that regard too, not just magicians and whatnot. So what's your take on the Amazing Randy?
He's 50-50 is about the best way to describe it. He has good qualities and bad qualities. I have done a lot of digging on him. There was a documentary not too long ago about him, An Honest Liar. I actually helped fund that on Kickstarter. I submitted some money, so I had a digital copy of it, or a DVD copy of it, and an autographed set of the playing cards as well from it. Because since he did finally come out of the closet and admit that he's gay, that was an important step, I felt, for adding another person of LGBTQ.
But he did come out of the closet.
Yes, he
eventually
did. And
for those who don't know who Amazing Randy is, can you just set that up for them?
Yes, James Randi is the ultimate skeptic, you could say. He's made a career of debunking faith healing, ufology, any kind of psychic phenomena. Uri Geller was someone that he just went after repeatedly. Yeah. He covered everything. He offered his $1 million challenge, which to this day has not been paid. He said, for anyone who can ultimately prove beyond a scientific doubt that something is truly unexplainned, or something prove to science once and for all that something does exist, he will give them $1 million. That's never, although that's been contested by some people, that some of the things that should have won awards were kept out of there. There was actually some of my recent research dug into a paranormal author named D. Scott Rogo, who wrote 30 different books on paranormal topics, from UFOs to psychic abilities, near-death experiences, all of that. He likes Randy in some respects, but he also admitted that he said he was too hard on Geller, and that from his own investigations, he felt that Geller actually did have some abilities. But no one would ever know the full extent of the truth behind a lot of Geller's talents and all of that.
Well, I mean, his most famous, show was when he was on the Johnny Carson show, right, with Uri Geller, and Uri Geller was going to come out and do this bending of the spoons, where he like rubs his fingers together like this on the handle, and the spoon bends, and Randy switched it out backstage, or Carson's team did, or whoever. And then he couldn't bend the spoon. And that was it. That was like killed so much of his career, because that seemed like that was proof, right? That he didn't have the ability to bend metal. Yeah.
And I don't know, there's a lot of cases in psychical research where performing is not always as easy as just going in front of an audience and doing something. So you always have to take things with a grain of salt. I try and be as optimistic as I can about things. I haven't looked into Geller's career with a fine-tooth comb to find out every single detail. But I'm not going to chastise him for one mistake, even though that sort of did ruin his career entirely. But actually, interestingly about D. Scott Rogo, I bought a few books written by him, so I decided to start looking into him. He was murdered in 1990. I had no idea about that. He was also gay. Very quiet about it. He didn't discuss it a lot with a lot of people. But he wrote extensively on all sorts of different paranormal topics. And one of his books that he co-wrote was the Tuhunga Canyon Encounters. It's about a lesbian couple that was repeatedly abducted by aliens over a span of about 20 years. It's one of those obscure works that's sort of fallen by the wayside. And he didn't explicitly talk about their sexual relationship in the book itself, but enough hints were left that you knew that they were an item.
Interesting. Was there anything to do with reproductive intervention with or experiments? Because often that's the case, not all the time, but often that's the case that you hear with women.
Yeah, I believe there may have been some cases. It's been a while. I haven't gone over. I have a pile of notes about a foot high from all of these different books that I've been researching, so I'd have to go all back through all my notes. I know I believe it was in the 1950s and 60s, and he wrote the book in the 70s. I can't remember the details of their experiences, but I know that it was repeated abductions, full abductions onto a ship. I don't know what kind of experience or what experiments were conducted on board or not. I cannot. My brain has been too full because for this new project, I'm not just talking about hauntings. I am going over the entire spectrum of the paranormal. Oh, cool. So I'm researching things like alien abductions, different religious cults and religious traditions, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, creature called Popobawa that I mentioned in the book, which is supposed to be this bat demon in Zanzibar. Josh Gates covered it in one of his old shows, but he failed to mention that most of the victims are men that report being raped by this bat demon creature. But I'm covering spirituality, psychic mediums, every single paranormal topic I can find. And I'm learning very quickly that there isn't a single aspect of the paranormal that doesn't have some queer LGBTQ aspect to it. There are so many interesting characters throughout all of paranormal research that have some kind of tie to LGBTQ people.
It's really cool that you're expanding.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Ken Summers, Queer Hauntings, True Tales of Gay and Lesbian host, the author of. And then what's the title? Do you have a title for your next book yet? Or?
Not yet. I've been talking about doing this since 2009 when my last book came out. I spoke a bit with Stacey Horn, who wrote Unbelievable, about this idea, and she was rather excited to find out. I was very, very busy in other ventures and regular menial day jobs for several years, so I put it off. So I've just started picking up momentum about a year ago with this. Tentatively, I'm calling it Weirdly Queer, but I doubt that's going to be the finished title of it. The more I work on this, the more it keeps expanding out, and I'm developing quite the library of books and information. I have at least 3 or 4 dozen stacks of journal articles to go through and pick apart with a fine-tooth comb. There's just so much research that I'm discovering on this topic.
Have you ever attempted to use the FOIA Act, Freedom of Information Act, to see if you can find any governmental investigations or cases in this regard?
I have actually delved into Project Blue Book and a few other things like that. The problem is there's actually a book called The Abduction Enigma that talks about alien abductions. And in it states that through research that has been done, approximately 60% of abductees are known to have been gay, lesbian, bisexual, or have some sort of alternate sexuality.
You said 60%.
60%, which is quite surprising and quite high because I don't find a lot of the research on it. And the problem is, in a lot of cases, you don't have people saying, oh, yeah, by the way, I'm gay. Here's my interview.
It's not included in
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And actually that comes up a lot. Like J.V. Ryan avoided recording anything about sexuality in all of his work with psi phenomena because he felt that it would undermine the integrity of his work, and he didn't want people to laugh at his work. He wanted to just stick with the facts.
It's so pathetic.
So a lot of this stuff is just hidden away, and it's just covered up, and you're just trying to go through tons of material just to find the slightest little shred of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, fortunately now with people like yourself and just the times are different. Hopefully that won't be a problem with real studies going forward.
I hope so.
Yeah. Because that, scientifically you need to check all the boxes. You want to get as much data as you can about the experiencer in order to come to the closest to a conclusion or a theory or hypothesis, if nothing else, that you can. So yeah, and I've been bugging you for probably over a year now to come on the show.
At least that long, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah. So I'm glad you came on. Thank you. It's such a fascinating topic, and I think it's been something that's not getting much coverage out there. And okay, so what if 60% is what the abduction or experiencer? Abductees. What is the actual best guesstimate that you've heard of the ratio between gay to straight in the populace? Because I've heard things from like 9% to 15%.
It fluctuates depending on the study and the parameters of the study. I would say still safely, it's the safest assumption would be as far as identifying as LGBTQ would still be somewhere in that 10% range. When they have been recently doing more studies on people and their sexuality when it comes to their entire lives and experimenting and thoughts and feelings and all of that, it could go as high as 30-40%.
Right. Well, that could be quite different. Because I think a lot of people just experiment with their own sexuality. That doesn't necessarily make them either gay or lesbian.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
I think the problem with our society is that, you think that, if I have these thoughts, then, that's bad because I don't want to be, or I don't want to try to experiment because then that means I'm either gay or lesbian, and it's like, no, biology is not that rigid. It's just not, and especially our brains are very complex.
Yeah, and I think we're realizing that sexuality has never been something that is so easily defined as we always thought that it was. Well, we didn't always think it was. Back 100, 200 years ago, it was a lot more of a fluid subject, and there wasn't this idea of heterosexuality so much. And then we defined heterosexual and homosexual and bisexual and all of that, and now we're learning that trying to put people into those neat little boxes isn't quite working out the way that we thought it would.
Right. Well, especially if you're a scientist and you're studying, you're like, this doesn't quite work. Now I have to create a new term, a new category, a new whatever. Because there's a ton of gray in humans. But historically, it's actually not been the case. I would argue that, pre, Judeo-Christian, Islam, the big three. So like, pre, I don't know, 2000 BC. My guess is that there was a lot of acceptance because we know ancient mythologies included these various characters that didn't exactly fit into a male or female category. We know that shamans kind of played a place in between. And more to the point, when I did my film with my wife, our film Born Equal, we went and interviewed different religious people about their perspective, And the Navajo Indian, have what you probably have heard of, the two-spirit.
Yes, or Berdache.
The Berdache, right. And which is actually a French term. So I think a lot of Native Americans don't particularly like that anymore. But so the two-spirit is like the next best way to describe, what their shaman would be. But it's a more broader term. Meaning I don't fit into this category or that category. And the Plains Indians used to have this ceremony where they would build a fire around a child, and there would be toys left, or not toys, but like things, left in the center that were either male or female, supposedly oriented, hunting, sewing, whatever. And then the first thing that the child would run out of is sort of like what their role would be in society. So, if a female, runs out with bow and arrow, that's the first instinct that they have. It's like, okay, this is a warrior. Or, a male comes out and, they grab like, I don't know, their macrame, whatever, like that's kind of okay. That's the role that they're going to play. And so it wasn't about, you're a male, you have to be this, you're a female, you have to be that. There was much more acceptance, I think. But.
Oh yeah, definitely. And looking into all these cultures and like Two-Spirit and all that, it does get more complex than people realize, because we think, Two-Spirit just meant that they were gay or lesbians. No, it's not that easy. It's sometimes it was sort of a gender neutral type of thing. Sometimes it was that they expressed, like a male would express femininity, but still be heterosexual at the same time.
That's me sometimes, man. Like sometimes, like I feel like I'm having an ultra feminine moment, and I'm cool with that. It doesn't make me less of a man. And I think there's a lot of confusion, and people feel uncomfortable with themselves because modern society has been like, this is, what a man is. This is what a woman is.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with. I think a lot of it has to do with empires coming in and conquering different aspects and infusing their beliefs onto everyone else's. That's when you start seeing there are some native tribes now that still say, well, no, we never had any gay people in our tribe. That just never happened, because they're trying to pretend like that didn't happen, because now it's a negative aspect that they have. And like African tribes, you have a lot of issues with reports of witchcraft and demonization of homosexuality and all of that, because of the very strong Christian import that's come in and started changing minds. Even looking into like Mesoamerica and South America, you have a lot of different cultures down there that were very, very open to a range of sexuality. And then with the Spanish conquistadors coming in and the Catholicism that they brought with them, sort of changing the culture and making that a negative as well.
Yeah. Obviously, in our society, there's sort of there's this like backlash that's occurring, and I think there was a lot of bitterness when in 2012, gay marriage was legalized, and in the past couple of years, there have certainly been a spike in like hate crimes across the board.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the future of America will be kinder? Or do you think we're going to have this sort of like, I don't know, like culture war for some time to come?
Well, I think it's a quote I've always loved. It's always been attributed to Mark Twain, but he's never actually said it. It's history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. One thing I've learned from historical research is we run in cycles. And the same things happen on repeat over and over again. Things become bad and then they become good. And I don't know if we're heading into a period where there's going to be a lot more negative backlash, or if this is just backlash to the overall broader change that's going on in society.
Because change came quick.
Yeah, and it's a very abrupt change. I liken it a lot to back in the 60s when we started opening up and racial divides started breaking away and people becoming very uncomfortable with that. And you had a lot of cases of lynchings and all sorts of social issues around that. And I think that's sort of what we're still struggling with now. It seems like in my lifetime, I've noticed things go from Ryan White dying of AIDS and Reagan pretending like AIDS didn't exist and there being a huge backlash from the gay community about that, to Ellen coming out live on TV, to gay marriage. And it's been, when you look at the broad perspective, it's been a gradual positive. But you're going to experience these dips every so often because there's always going to be something that people latch on to. I always say society always needs an underdog. There's this deep-rooted feeling in most people where in order to feel good about yourself, you have to put someone else below you so that you feel like you're a little bit above someone else. And that's a hard habit for humans to break.
And because of that, when you're an oppressed people, you know, I wonder, because it seems to me that hauntings tend to be tend to be what, I don't know, I'm just guessing, like 70% tend to be entities that have had negative experiences. Would that be like a fair estimate? Or
you know, it makes me wonder if anyone's actually ever done studies on figuring that out. But I would say the most well-known cases tend to be of that nature, but I don't know if that's legitimate or if it's just because those are sensationalized more and we pay more attention to the stories that are associated with some kind of tragedy tied with them.
Yeah, maybe. I guess I just thought that, you know, because anger is a very powerful emotion in this life. So if there's something to keep you hanging around, I think that would be one of them. And suffering. And, you know, so you do have reports of slaves haunting. And so I guess I wonder, you know, if people are oppressed or, you know, harmed. It seems to me in our long history, especially, you know, in America specifically, the slaves, and then worldwide, you know, gay, lesbian, and trans and queer. So, you know, maybe there's something to do with that in relation to the stat you gave earlier that, you know, 60% of abductions are related to people who, you know, identify as gay or trans.
It's an interesting thought.
Like if you're a psychiatrist now, right? Who are you treating? You're most likely treating people who are going through, had narcissistic parents, abusive parents, you know, trauma when they're growing up. And so if you're a cosmic psychologist, maybe you're coming here and you just happen to be looking at the people who have been traumatized. I don't know. I'm guessing, but
it's possible. And that's where, even with aliens, I always wonder about that. And that's one of those other things where I have these random thoughts every once in a while. I always wondered if maybe what we're experiencing with aliens isn't extraterrestrials from another world, but basically time travelers from the future coming back to specific points in history, or sort of checking out what people used to be like back thousands and upon thousands of years ago. It's not necessarily what I believe, but it's a curiosity of mine.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation about time travelers, and on the one hand, I hate it. I hate it because it's like, dude, like if you can time travel, anyone can like come and peek in on me and like every little thing I've done in my entire life. No way, I don't want that.
Well, they can do that on Facebook now. So.
Pretty much, exactly. Yeah, don't take your phone everywhere you go. But then on the other side, I think, okay, maybe if they somehow defy what we know about physics, maybe those sentient beings, maybe future us, are so advanced that our fears of seeing ourselves for who we are, or other people seeing us who we are, aren't really justified because they're so evolved they're such evolved beings that it's almost like, I don't know, like an angel, right? Looking in on you. Like people think, oh God, and angels are looking on me all the time. So it means they see every tiny little stupid thing you do. And, I think that if that's the case, then I don't feel as bad about it. But I don't know, the whole idea of time travel, I just feel like it can make things really messy,
Yes, it can. But I think of it too as like maybe they're conducting like an anthropological study on, like we look back at fossilized remains of early ancestors of mankind and study the bones and all of that. Maybe it's something along that line. But I've always loved the idea of time travel, probably because I've always loved Back to the Future and all of those movies. And I've always wished that I could go back in time. But I know it's one of those questions that I'm hoping can be answered in a positive way at some point, but right now it's scientifically impossible.
But everything is about perspective.
Yes.
So like in ufology, the debunker argument is like, oh, it's ridiculous it would take someone forever to visit here from so many light years away. But if you're the pilot of a ship and you're going near the speed of light, traveling to another star system, what for their planet that they're leaving could be 50 years, for them could actually be like 10 years, which isn't so bad if you're an intergalactic traveler. So yes, you're leaving your life behind, but you yourself aren't aging because of the theory of relativity, according to Einstein, which has, for all intents and purposes, been proven. So maybe time travel, there's some other, something that we don't understand about it yet. That could bring in a new perspective and sort of, console our concerns about it.
Yeah, and for now, at least, we have the interesting YouTube videos of people who claim that they are from a couple hundred years in the future and have photographic evidence and all that, or that one gentleman who said that he went back and watched Gettysburg Address being performed by Lincoln, I believe. So there's a lot of strange stories out there. And
it was really fascinating / entertaining in the early days when the only major person doing this was Art Bell in the 90s and the early 2000s. And so you would have John Tudor or like these other people come on and claim that they were a time traveler. And it was fascinating, but it was like a couple of people. But now anyone can go on YouTube and like tell a story, blur your face out. There's one you've probably seen. It's a video of a guy like playing with this weird substance in his hands on the table, and he's like, "Oh, it's from the future." I'm like, "Really? Are people falling for that? That's crazy."
People are still very gullible,
but it's great. Yes. It's great clickbait. Yeah. So with this book, when do you know it's going to be published? Do you have any idea?
Everyone's been asking me that. I stupidly thought last year when I started working on this again that, I'm going to try and have it out 2019. And then I started digging into all this other research and realized that there's no possible way that I could even begin writing it this year. Yeah. So I'm hoping 2020, possibly 2021. Because I'm very much a stickler for details. I want to double check and triple check every single fact and reference everything to some kind of documentation. Sure. Yeah. So it's a lot of work. I have a board set up with Post-it notes on just probably about a third of the topics I want to cover, and it probably has about 30 or 40 Post-it notes on it right now. So there's a lot of material. I still have about 24 books to read. I have another dozen books on their way here on various topics. So there's a lot of material just to get the notes finished on before I can even start forming it into chapters with some kind of logical sense to them. But I don't want to lose momentum on this because I have a bad habit of doing that, getting lost in the research. So I am going to cut myself off at some point, but I'm hoping 2020, 2021, somewhere in that ballpark, I'll have something finished and out.
Right. Are you going to continue or pick up blogging or writing about it online at all, or that just take up too much more time of yours?
I did start a new blog on my website, moonspenders.com. I've taken off all the local haunting stuff, which I know has upset some people, and switched it over completely to queer paranormal aspects. But I have been blogging on there once or twice a month, depending on time. It's been a little while. Because a lot of the time, once I get going on research, I don't want to lose where I'm going and stop and write about something. But I do have a few articles planned. I wrote recently about the torso killings in Cleveland, and about all the queer connections with that whole murder. The series of murders that people don't realize. Some of the main suspects were gay men. Some of the victims were believed to have been gay men as well. It's a lot of really weird stuff because I'm interested in the whole wide range of weird, creepy, everything like that.
Yeah, but I think the fact that you're focusing in, at least for the most part, on LGBTQ subjects.
Yes.
I think, just like any other field, when you hone in on something in particular, you'll uncover something that has yet to have been noticed, which I think you're already doing. And I think that's noble and fascinating in its own right.
Yeah, and I actually just this past week discovered a new haunting that I'm researching. I found it in a folklore archive in Indiana. There's a place called Shiloh Cemetery in Indiana. There's a ghost story attached to that. Supposedly there's a gay man that haunts the cemetery who was murdered near there. I started digging into that story. That there's no evidence yet whether or not that person was gay, but it was connected in with a series of about 20 different murders in the Indianapolis area, some of whom were gay men murdered for being gay. And there were 2 known gay men who were also killed in that area, who actually fit the storyline of this ghost story attached to the cemetery. So that's just starting to get researched by me right now, and hopefully I'll find some more details on that one.
So were they like associated murders or?
Yeah, well, the one victim that died near there his body was thrown off an overpass just down the street from the cemetery, and he's supposed to be a protective spirit keeping people away. The other 2 victims were murdered a few miles away from the cemetery, but one was stabbed and one was shot, and they were killed for being gay by someone who they picked up hitchhiking, and they are the basis of the story that this one girl told for the folklore archive. So there's a lot of details that are sketchy. I've only found a couple articles so far, but it's turning into a really interesting story.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Earlier you had mentioned that a friend of yours had passed, and you had seen his ghost. But you mentioned that feeling of feeling guilty. Myself and some friends of mine, when we were younger, lost a friend very tragically. And I was supposed to be there that day. I wasn't. Myself and even those that were there had to deal with this sense of guilt that they didn't do enough or couldn't do enough. Or for me, I wasn't there to do anything to help prevent this from happening. And so, that guilt follows you around. Do you feel that we need to communicate with the dead in order to find relief from that? Or, is that something we can just figure out on our own?
I think for the most part, we can figure it out on our own. It's comforting it's more comforting if we feel that we are communicating directly with that person, so we can unburden ourselves from that guilt in an easier manner to untuck. Sure. But sort of coming to terms with it yourself, I think, is a very important thing. It took me a year to fully get past the point of blaming myself and realize that I had no way of knowing how bad things were. He never came across as depressed. He called me, he was in an abusive relationship in the past, and we had spoken on the phone a few times when he was in the middle of that. And toward the end, he was actually getting better. Everything was going in a positive direction. He was in a new, healthy relationship. He was happier. Things were going well for him. Yeah. And it was sort of just out of the blue. So I think the important thing all of us can keep in mind with a lot of things like that is, you can't always change what has happened, but you can change what will happen.
That's true.
And if you just focus on, well, okay, I can't bear all the burden myself on this, but what I can do is take what I've learned from this and move forward with it and be more mindful of other people. And if I can help someone else out in some way, make a little bit more effort, just not necessarily to atone for our mistakes or what we perceive as a bad moment, but just to feel better about ourselves and feel like we're doing something right in a lot of ways.
All right. Well, I think that's a good way to end it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Ken. And where can people find out more about you, sites, social media?
Sure. And it's been my pleasure to be on here. My website is moonspenders.com. It covers all aspects of queer paranormal, information about my writing and all of that. You can find some of my older articles on weekinweird.com, run by Greg and Dana Newkirk, who produced Hellier. I'm on Twitter at Moonspenders. I am on Facebook at Moonspenders as well, though I avoid Facebook like the plague. And all my contact information is pretty much on my website, or you can reach me through Twitter as well.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and Facebook can feel like the plague sometimes.
Yes, very much.
All right, thanks for coming on, Ken. Hopefully we'll do it again. Maybe before your book, because if you're going to wait till 2021, that's a couple of years. So.
I know. Yeah. I'll be glad to be on. Not wait another year and a half to discuss it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Ken. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGR Radio, the best in alternative talk radio. I want to thank Race Hobbs, Bill Skywatcher, my producers, and also remind you that we are moving Tuesdays 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time live. We'll have a call-in line number for you, and eventually, when I feel more comfortable with it, we'll just start doing open lines as well. To find out more about myself and Paranormal Now specifically, go to paranormalnow.net. You can find me on Instagram at Paranormal Now. All right, that's it. And until next time, everyone, live in the mystery. Be well.